This is Brother Peter Diamond, vaticancatholic.com. I wanted to talk about the recent flooding in Pakistan, the Ground Zero Mosque controversy, and some related issues. As people know, over the past month or so, massive flooding has occurred in Pakistan. About 1/5 of the country is underwater. Approximately 20 million people have been displaced and/or are homeless. Almost 2,000 people have been killed. The UN recently said that the flooding in Pakistan is worse than the 2004 Indonesian tsunami, which killed a few 100,000 people. And the point I wanted to make is that when one considers this event on a natural level, it's obviously a mind-boggling tragedy. When any individual loses his or her home, that's obviously a great suffering and hardship. But when you consider that 20 million people have lost their homes and/or been displaced, it's truly catastrophic. However, when considered from a more supernatural perspective, it really shouldn't be a surprise. Pakistan is a land of almost complete darkness. It's almost 100% Islamic. There are laws which persecute anything that approaches Christianity. There are, quote, blasphemy laws that prohibit anyone from criticizing their book, the Koran. And so it's a land locked in the darkness of the false Islamic religion, which blasphemes the Trinity and rejects the divinity of Jesus Christ. And so should it be a surprise that something like this has occurred in Pakistan? And the answer is no, it should not be a surprise. The modernists and liberals might say, well, they don't know, they haven't had a chance to hear the truth. And this again points us to why it's so important to not only believe in Catholic dogma and the revelation of Christ, but assess things from a more supernatural perspective. Jesus Christ revealed in the gospel, for example, in John 18:37, he says, "Everyone who is of the truth heareth my voice." The Bible tells us that you were heretofore darkness, but now light in the Lord. People need to start thinking about things in terms of the light of Christ and the darkness of the devil. Those who have not been freed of original sin and incorporated into the church through baptism are in darkness. And as the church has always taught, those who remain in darkness their whole lives and are never brought into the church are not brought into the church because they were not of the truth and not of goodwill. And a number of fathers of the church make this point with special emphasis. Specifically, St. Augustine, St. Fulgence, and St. Prosper speak of the massa damnata, the mass of the damned. That's the teaching that as a result of original sin, all people in original sin are part of a lump, a mass of humanity that is headed for condemnation, for damnation. And they are not freed from that state until they are illuminated by the light of Christ, positively incorporated into the church and baptized. Now it should be emphasized that not everything those fathers said on the topic was necessarily the teaching of the church, but their general consensus and conclusion, namely that those who are ignorant of the gospel or outside of the revelation of Christ are in a state in which they are excluded from salvation, is in fact the dogmatic teaching of the church and the tradition of the apostles. It's not like what the modernists and the liberals and the proponents of, quote, baptism of desire and invincible ignorance believe, that, well, we just can't judge, we don't know. No, they're in a state in which they are separated from salvation, they are outside of salvation. They must be brought into the church to be saved. And if they're not, it's because God saw they were not of the truth. And on this point, I want to quote St. Augustine from the year 426. Quote, "Consequently, both those who have not heard the gospel and those who, having heard it, and having been changed for the better, did not receive perseverance, none of these are separated from that lump which is known to be damned, as all are going into condemnation." End quote. And so he says those who have not heard the gospel, as well as those who have heard it but did not persevere, they're all part of the lump which is going into condemnation. And so that's sadly the case with the Muslims in Pakistan and other Middle Eastern countries. They're part of a lump of humanity that is headed for condemnation. That's why we should try to convert them, of course. But if they're not converted, or if they don't hear, it's because God saw that they were not of the truth. St. Augustine also makes this point. In the year 428, he says, "God foreknew that if they had lived and the gospel had been preached to them, they would have heard it without belief, end quote. And the Muslims are not only in a state of original sin, but they're positively in a state of even deeper darkness because they are taught this false demonic religion that positively blasphemes the true God and perverts the doctrine of Christ. And so it's a multitude of individuals, sadly, of bad will. So it's not a surprise that things like this flood have occurred there that on the natural level are mind-boggling catastrophes. Now I want to talk about a related issue and this controversy surrounding the Ground Zero Mosque and the 9/11 event. People are in an uproar over this plan to build a mosque near the World Trade Center and where the towers were destroyed on 9/11. CNN also had a big story on a Tennessee mosque that is being opposed by people. An Islamic group in Tennessee has a mosque, but their congregation is becoming so large that they need a new and bigger mosque in Tennessee, and people are vigorously protesting this, and in fact some of their construction vehicles have been vandalized. And I found this story to be very interesting because we're talking about heartland America here, and this false diabolical religion which locks people in the darkness of the devil is spreading like wildfire, even here in America. You have this mosque in Tennessee that isn't big enough to hold all of their members. They have more than 1,000 members at this mosque in Tennessee, so they want to build a bigger one. And CNN interviewed this woman, this American woman, dressed in her Islamic garb, all covered up, and she's promoting Islam and explaining why they need this mosque. There are just so many families involved. And then when you think about these families and you hear this woman, that's when the evil behind the acceptance and the promotion of this false religion really comes out. When you see up close the lives and the souls being lost and deceived by the promotion of this diabolical religion, the evil behind it really comes to the fore. And then when you think about the Vatican II anti-popes who have promoted and endorsed this religion again and again, a religion that the true popes condemned as an abomination and diabolical, it's a blasphemy and a heresy so great as to be beyond words. One cannot put into words how evil it is for anti-Pope John Paul II and Benedict XVI and Paul VI to praise and endorse Islam. There are no words to describe how evil it is. It's an infinite evil. And when you see the individuals involved up close, and all these families being deceived, and all these souls being led onto the path of damnation, that's when it really comes out. And so all the people who have explained this heresy away, or said it's ambiguous, or quote material heresy, you will not get away with it before the judgment seat of Christ. Just wait. And so it really captured the evil behind the spread of Islam, the acceptance of it, etc. On the related issue of the controversy surrounding the proposed mosque at Ground Zero, in our opinion, this is an orchestrated deception to ingrain it into the minds of the public that there is a connection between radical Islam and 9/11. For when you study the issue of 9/11 and look into it, as some of the videos we have on our website do, you discover that Muslims were not the ones behind 9/11. It was clearly an inside job. And then when you examine some of the evidence, such as the dancing Israelis who were there in advance of the attack on the Trade Center, filming the event before it happened and as it happened, and then cheering it on. And it was later discovered that these 5 dancing Israelis were in fact Mossad agents. And then when you learn some of the facts about the dual Israeli citizens and the supporters of Israel in our government, and the companies who had the wherewithal to enable or assist this event and this attack, a picture begins to emerge about who orchestrated it, who benefited from it, how it enabled war in the Middle East, etc. And so the powers that be want to keep the public under the impression that Islam was responsible, and so they are in favor of this mosque. By keeping it in the headlines, the effect created is that whenever people think of 9/11, they think of a mosque, they think of Islam. And that's why people pointed out that a, quote, Greek Orthodox church was not given a permit to build somewhere in New York City, but this mosque had no problem getting all the permissions, etc. It's because they want it to be built there for that reason, in our opinion. And when you look into some of these issues, you discover that the Jewish power structure and the supporters of Israel in New York City, that's like their center of authority. In our opinion, the Jewish power structure in New York City is like Little Israel. And some of the videos on 9/11 get into how the Port Authority was very suspiciously connected with some of the questionable events on 9/11. And the Jewish influence in the Port Authority is not difficult to ascertain. And some of the conservatives were recently puzzled by the fact that this mosque was approved and that the Jewish mayor of New York is behind the construction of it. It all makes sense if you consider what we've just been discussing. For the facts which show the connections between Israel and 9/11, see the documentary 9/11 Missing Links, although we don't agree with every statement in the video.